Over there? Over there? Hi. Good afternoon, good evening by Indiana standards. For those who don't know me, I'm Victor Raskin. I'm a professor of linguistics and associate director of CERIAS. My major contribution to the research component of CERIAS was conjoining, as it were, computational linguistics or natural language processing, which is my main field, with information security. And this paper, which may strike you as very different from what you have been exposed to, has been basically in the mainstream of serious research. Julia Taylor has a PhD in computer science and engineering from the University of Cincinnati, working full-time telecommuting for a high-tech startup company and spending most of her time here as a visiting scholar at CERIAS and linguistics. I want to give you a little bit of a shock, not too bad, I hope. A story. A friend of ours on Facebook, somebody we know, placed this update a couple of months ago. A white dude was hitting on me at the bar all night. What can you make of it? Because what we made of it, you will be hearing for the rest of the hour.
It's all about you. It's all about you.
Yeah, it's all about me. So, what do you know from this statement? Yes, Ryan?
So I'm assuming that the person describing this was female and probably not white.
Yeah, thanks. That's the point that we got out of it. And then we published a paper about this phenomenon from the computational formal linguistics point of view. And what you are going to hear is another paper which we submitted to a major security forum, turning this into a forensic mechanism for very thorny InfoSec issues such as insider threat and social engineering, which you cannot really protect yourself from with a traditional, intrusion network software package. So that's where we are. Will you take over, Julia, or do you want me to continue?
Why don't you continue?
With this slide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we couldn't find a better name for what Ryan just did. We call it WD, standing for white dude inference. We realized that there were lots and lots of situations when people say something like that, seemingly insignificant, casually, unsolicited, in their blogs or on Facebook updates or in the private conversation, which, gives something away. I'm sure the writer, who does happen to be not white, was not at all interested in reporting that to her Facebook friends. For most of them know her, and it's trivial for them. And those who don't know her personally, I'm sure that was not her intention. That's what got our attention.
There's something else that is going on here, which you probably read from this slide. There are two possibilities. Either we can conclude that the author is non-white, or we have absolutely no idea what the race is. All we know that it's atypical for the writer to date white people. So no race included in this information about the author herself, but rather her preference towards dating, and therefore this is atypical. Please keep this in mind. There are sort of two facets to what we are talking about. A, social stereotype of what we are saying, and B, something particular about that person who is saying that is known to the immediate group. With that in mind, it's back to you.
We started thinking of other situations like that. Imagine a person comes back home after having been away and reports, as usual, Peter was telling jokes at the funeral. Somebody else other than Ryan, what would we hear then? Somebody walks through the door and says, as usual, Peter was telling jokes at the funeral.
Peter's always jovial, right? Peter's always jovial.
Yeah, that's what is said. But what is the background of that? Yes.
He's also saying that someone close to him or someone that he knew has died recently because they were at a funeral.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes.
And maybe the speaker always attends many funerals.
Yeah,
Good one.
yeah, possible. Okay, let's go to the next one, and maybe you'll get this trend.
Let's start with the first one, though. We went to dinner and he cut his fish with a knife. Anything unusual happening here? Any of you come from a culture where you don't cut fish with a knife?
Yeah, right.
Um,
What we think is happening is that if I come back from a funeral and I tell you X was there and Y was there and the eulogy was wonderful, and as usual Peter was telling jokes there, we don't think anything significant takes place. But if somebody walks in, probably without even telling you that they're coming back from the funeral, and all they tell you is, as always, as usual, Peter was telling jokes at the funeral, we think that underlying that there is an expectation on the part of the speaker, probably shared with the rest of the culture, that if you have a lot of good jokes to tell, maybe you should wait for a more suitable occasion rather than just spilling it out at people attending the funeral. If again, the situation is always the same. You realize we are returning you to the Facebook update situation. There is no narrative there. There is, out of the blue, a white dude was hitting at me. Yes, we can, of course, derive from that she's probably female. Actually, you see the name, and the name is female, so that's no mystery. And probably she went to the bar, and so on and so forth. But that's all she's saying. She's not telling us there was this dude there. He was young and handsome and tall, had blue eyes, was wearing a leather jacket, and he was white and hitting on me all night. Nothing happened. But she says a white dude, and that's all that is said. Nothing else. All of us can be characterized in any number of ways. And if there is just one, and there had been no conversation about the race, that's a different situation. We believe that the person gives away a default, and that's where we're heading.
Here's another example. This example comes from conversation of two cousins, both professionals. And one tells the other, my manager asked me if I would fly coach to Germany. Again, with our inference, we think that the underlying mechanism here, or what she is saying, that normally she doesn't fly coach. She usually flies business class. So how do you know when it is the default and when it's not? We are assuming two things. We are assuming that whenever you are communicating with someone, you're either producing so-called narrative, you're adding information to something that it's already know, or you are overriding something that's in your mind. And it's this override that we are focusing on. If she would have said, my manager asked me if I would fly to Germany, we could probably say, okay, she doesn't care what she is flying, what type of class she is flying. We can sort of assume that it's the same thing that she typically flies. If she would have said, my manager asked me if I would fly business to Germany, again, it's not her expectation. It's something in addition to what her expectation is. And it's this override that we are focusing on. This is a little bit more of
A theory in part of linguistics is called pragmatics, where people study typical situations of communication and try to come up in the linguistic tradition with formal algorithmic rules. We can go on from here.
add versus override we just did, right?
Mhm.
Oh, something else that is here, which Victor sort of touched on. You don't overwrite where you introduced the concept previously. If it's what Victor was telling about, it's a white dude who was wearing a, I don't know, leather jacket and was drinking blah blah blah. There is nothing specific about it. We are talking about the white dude. He is sort of primed. All the information about him is primed. We are good.
Priming meaning mentioning. Even if in a conversation the same update would have happened in a conversation, and she would say, speaking of race, a white dude was hitting on me all night at the bar, the surprise is gone. The default override is gone. We are prepared. For whatever reason, she wants to talk about race, and she's talking about race. It is the fact that suddenly the information about the race is given without any warning, any preparation, for whatever reason, that we have to construe from there that something is going on. The same thing at the end of this slide. If the speaker had prepared us for the manager's request, the company is in such a bad financial state that my manager asked me to fly coach to Germany, we would have figured out that she normally flies business. But she basically mentions that.
She's not hiding anything about it. When she is saying, can you believe it, my manager asked me to fly coach, there is more of a, she is concentrating on that she is upset about something, and the fact that she is flying coach is a little more subtle, hidden, something unusual.
Basically, it loses its significance for us.
Yeah.
Let me inject something here. Julia mentioned in connection with the white dude that one possibility is the one that we correctly identified, that she may be non-white and it's not typical for her. And there is a kind of a societal expectation, and I don't want to go into this sensitive issue, but there's probably still a societal expectation that people sort of date within their own race. I think that is much less so now than it was before. That is a societal thing. The other possibility that Julia mentioned was that maybe this person, whatever race she is, just never dates white people. If all we get is that one sentence, we have no way to get to this latter thing. There isn't enough information. If we know her personally, yeah, sure, that is possible. But all we are given is that one thing. then we can suppose maybe it is like that. But the speaker, the writer, didn't really make it possible for us to be sure. So we typically fly on stereotypes, on things that we suppose all to know whether it's actually true or not, right?
Could it also be possible, could the type of bar have anything to do with it? So maybe her friends know the bar that she went to, and maybe at that bar,
It's mostly non-whites, right?
different race type bar, like, so it may have been a strange thing if there was a white guy at the bar to begin with. And maybe
Yeah,
so
it-
maybe she can be white, and she typically date white guys, but because
Again, absolutely,
Possible.
absolutely correct. Again, not enough information. Even if she had given us the name of the bar, can you imagine a white dude at Jake's? And maybe we're supposed to know that Jake's is only for African Americans or whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
You covered the individual defaults, right?
Mhm.
Yes. And
So individual defaults, we need to be fed more information or to know that person. If we don't know, we fall back on the easy, low-hanging fruit, that is, whatever stereotypes are there.
we covered the flight to Germany. If the individual default for a person to fly business all the time, that they're not going to concentrate on that. We also gave you an example of eating fish with a knife. I went to date and he cut his fish with a knife. We would be very confused how to interpret that sentence if we knew that for both of these people it would have been okay. So if the individual defaults are not necessarily cultural, as you don't cut a fish with a knife, but for them it's okay, it is normal, and she is saying that for whatever reason, we would have a hard time figuring out just from that text what it is and why. But at least we could say there's something going on. We are going to jump through the algorithm. We are into the insider thread.
Yeah, we are dealing, we are quoting here some of the recent and high-quality scholarship on that, coming primarily from Matt Bishop, a colleague and a friend from University of California at Davis. They ran a colloquium on insider thread at Dachstuhl Castle in Germany, a traditional venue for gatherings like that. And the entire colloquium, in 2008, the entire colloquium was devoted to a definition of insider threat, and that's what you are seeing here. Out of these, can you go on? Out of these situations, we are interested in the most difficult situation. That is, no unusual behavior can be traced from the log with the software which is available. No network intrusion. The person is completely authorized to use the network in which he accesses. Moreover, he is not stealing his colleagues' secrets. So there is no unusual behavior. He logs in, he does his work, he is selling his own information. That is a situation which is extremely hard to figure out with the typical information security software, because there's no violation of any kind, no intrusion of any kind. And so we are falling back here into non-technological measures. We discovered a U.S. government-issued spying counter-espionage manual. I don't know who it is for, it's not classified. And it says, look for changes in behavior. The usual traces, changes in lifestyle. Suddenly, the person on a 150,000 government salary, if that, is driving a Bulgari or manifesting some other unusual taste. In other words, the insider is stupid. We are not interested in that. We are interested in a smart insider. no trace whatsoever. All the money goes to the Swiss bank, and he lives a normal life. That's where we think our software, our technology can help.
And it is still a work in progress, so that's a caveat there. Oh, you've done that too. Okay.
So what we decided to capture in this system, which is some elements of it are implemented, all of them are sort of algorithmized. So in the normal course of development of the ontological semantic technologies that we'll tell you a little bit about in a second, we hope to cover all the elements of the system soon. The presupposition for it is a little scary. That is, what we are suggesting is observing the person's verbal output over a period of time. That is, some things that you can observe without any legal measures, like the blogs and the social network contributions, Facebook updates and stuff. Some, as per our legal system, if the person becomes a suspect, you may obtain a legal warrant and basically search warrant, and you can tap the telephone and wiretap whatever. The situation that we are trying to capture is the situation in which the person comes under suspicion and somebody wants to chat with him or her. And that is a situation in which experienced, highly paid investigator would try to engage the person in a casual conversation and look for keys. Smart person will look for probably the same clues that we are talking about. The advantage of what we are suggesting is that the person doesn't know what is happening, so he or she is not on the alert and not in the conscious hiding mood. They're just chatting. So that's the setting in which our technology can work. And you can start with openly available sources that people just make available.
Again, we're banking on the fact that when you are not on layer alert, you're going to say something that will mean more to us than to you. You will just say it and forget about it. It's your normal thing. You don't typically want people to know what it is you are doing outside of work. So you don't emphasize it, but it sort of slips through whatever it is that you are saying, or more importantly, not saying.
Imagine a very simple situation. Somebody says, I heard you were not feeling well. And the person says, I was not feeling well. I missed golf on Wednesday. And you realize what that means, that the person should have been dying. So the person gave away to us that missing golf is something which is the last thing, that golf is important. That's perfectly innocent. But it's that kind of thing that we are looking for.
So what you're looking at this monster right here are four things. Something that the person typically says in a sentence. So my manager wants me to fly.
You have to stand behind the podium to use the mic.
Oh, and that means that...
Use the mouse as a pointer.
Thank you. That's very nice. If I'm flying business to Germany, I am saying I am flying business to Germany. If I'm flying coach to Germany, I'm saying I'm flying coach to Germany. What if I'm not saying anything? What if I'm just saying I am flying to Germany? Good luck to you figuring that out. We are looking at something else here. We know what this person is expected to do. If he is working somewhere and he's flying on a business trip, then whatever the company is willing to pay for it. So that is possibly the expectation. something about his lifestyle. Perhaps he's not making that much, but he likes luxury and he flies typically business. That's what expected of him. Then we can probably figure out what he did this time, and it's this column right here. And
That means already investigation opened with a warrant. You need a warrant to access the airline records, for instance.
And so this is the expected behavior for the group, for the social class, for whatever, however much he is making, and this is his own preference. With that in mind, if he says, I am flying to Germany, no class specified, and we know that he usually flies coach, and this time he flew coach, we are okay. He is not hiding anything. No suspicion whatsoever. If he says that, he says nothing again, and this time he flies coach while typically he flies business, it's outside of what usually happens. Typically, it's because it's so unusual, you would specify it. It's not in your typical ontology, it's not in your mental space.
Yeah,
If
when
person
something
knows-
unusual happens to us, we usually mention it, especially in blogs and Facebook updates and chats with friends. So it becomes marked, as we say in linguistics, it becomes significant if something like that doesn't happen. That's unusual behavior. Notice that it's on zero signal, that is, the class cabin is not specified at all. We already can do something about it.
It's what you see in red here. So we go through it and basically go through all the possibilities of these four columns. What you see in red here is the obvious lie. He says that he is flying while one class, while typically, or not typically, but in this particular situation, he flies the other. That any system can catch, provided that they know information about these four columns. Right? So this is not the interesting case. But notice that if you remove this column right here, for each case in the second, let's call it E, F, and U column, there are three cases that are identical. The only thing that differentiates them is nothing coach or business of S. Basic math, right? Permutations. All good. And notice that every time we have a different indication in this column. So again, depending on what the person says, which is not caught anywhere, it's just a conversation with a friend, we can either suggest to investigator to look deeper, or to say, well, this person is probably okay, or at least they haven't done anything for us to be suspicious about. We can do that with not just flying business or coach, obviously. It can be absolutely any situation, as long as the ontology or your knowledge base provides information about what people typically do. So any situation is possible to detect, provided that the obvious situations are there. We're also assuming that if you are looking for a particular person, if there is an information leak, you'll be digging a little bit deeper into their behavior. So you have the information for the group that's expected. You're first comparing what he says against the group. If there is something missing, if something is wrong in what you expect, then you dig a little bit deeper. You're going into his personal profile, and you're getting better results from that. I think that covers inside of red.
What we have covered so far is the sort of informal analysis of the inside the threat situation. Where we are getting, and we should get there sooner rather than later, is that we have partially implemented and fully designed an automatic computational system which will be flagging situations that should be investigated further on the basis of this casual, unsolicited things, verbal output that people write or say, when they don't even necessarily know that anybody is investigating them.
Yes.
If we want to rely on verbal output, we have to take into account the context. Sometimes the user is under stress, sometimes it has some problems. So maybe it is the verbal output will be changing according to this context.
Very, very good point. We are not looking for keywords. Our system provides a complete, comprehensive analysis of everything that is said.
And we'll get,
And we'll get
there
there.
in the end. Again, the most important thing, you don't like that, is the nothing cases, when the user is not specifying something when we think he should, according to the expected behavior. It's all about you again.
Why don't we skip social engineering and focus just on inside the thread? It's actually an easier situation. If we have time, we'll return to that. So the system serves two situations, and they overlap a little bit, but social engineering is much easier. There's no 24-line, 5-column table there.
Let's just cover it a little.
Well, you know,
The idea again is that you are going to say something that you shouldn't, or not say something that's expected.
It's a funny term, by the way. I asked my undergraduates, 20-year-olds, recently what social engineering is, and they told me what it was, and that had been my impression when I first heard the term around here in information security. Social engineering is what President Obama is doing with health care. That is really doing legislation, and I reserve any judgment of that. That is changing the society. Suddenly, about 15 years ago, I started hearing this term in totally different sense. That is, I show up here dressed as a janitor and with the broom and bucket and try to get a key to the building or something like that. So I'm engineering my social role. That's the idea. Quite simply, I'm passing myself for somebody I'm not. And there's a couple of nice trade books by Kevin Mitnick, a very famous sort of a champion hackster of the 90s, who gained access to all kinds of systems through from employees who gave their passwords to him, etc. So how do you detect that situation is also what we cover.
That brings us to ontological semantics.
And ontological semantics is that natural language processing component that we brought into CERIAS and then applied to a number of traditional InfoSec problems and creating a few others. In the beginning of the decade, Mike Atala and I led a research group for 2 or 3 years and did some pioneering work in information hiding area in the business of inserting an indestructible watermark. We earned the dubious distinction of being the first paper that everybody quotes and usually criticizes. They say, well, Atala and others did that. We are going to do better than them. Those of you who are just entering the research area will realize that it is actually a distinction. If everybody is knocking you, that means that you did something knockable. What you have here is the entire theory, methodology, and technology of ontological semantics, which we have developed in the last 20 years.
Notice the color. This slide has actually color, so there's a difference between what is developed and implemented versus what is work in progress. For those of you that are paying attention to how we are presenting it, that should jump out at you. That's our default and not default.
The most important part of it, there are two in the higher block here, the ontology, which is an engineered conceptual structure, sort of our knowledge of the world, to a certain degree of granularity, grain size. It is language independence is the same for all languages. And then there is a lexicon for English and Spanish and any other language where every sense of every word or expression, phrasal, is defined in ontological terms. And then there is the semantic text analyzer for Riverglass Incorporated. This is the company that Julia and several others of my former PhDs, which Julia is not, work. It's called Semantic Text Analyzer, STAN. So STAN reads the text sentence after sentence, figures out the meaning of every word, and combines it all together to create a text meaning representation, several if the sentence is ambiguous, as they often are, trying to approximate the understanding of meaning in natural language. So that's the system that is in the background. Here, a couple of very primitive examples, like the ontological concept Go. Here is its hierarchical is a relationship. It's a motion event. Its agent is typically an animal, including humans. Its instrument could be body part, could be vehicle, maybe something else. The source and destination location, you will go from somewhere to somewhere, and there is a time. Here is the English. This is, and the label is in English just for our convenience. The computer pays no attention. It is not an English word for it. Here is the English word drive in its first verbal meeting. It has a certain syntactic structure that occurs in a certain situation, but its semantic structure is, it's based on the concept go. Its agent is human and actually adult, except in the state of Wyoming, where you can be 12, and then go to Mississippi where you can get married at 12. Its instrument is car, so driving is going somewhere by car driven by an agent. And the next one is a very primitive TMR. The TMR is go, the event, the agent is married, the instrument is car, source Boston, destination network on Wednesday. Mary drove from Boston to New York on Wednesday. That's the system which has been implemented.
Notice that no matter what language you are going to work in, the TMR is going to be the same. So the lexicon sense of any language should roughly correspond to what we do as human when we translate that. So if you would say that in Russian or whichever language you want to, the text meaning representation that the system would see is going to be identical. The lexicon's going to be different. That's all about you again.
Yeah, this is just a list of the InfoSec applications that we have implemented, usually academically, that is to the level of a prototype or pilot or proof of concept. What we are doing at Riverglass and several other companies is getting it to the product level. And when we do, you will hear about it.
Okay, now we are going back to the hidden inference or unintended inference. And suppose you are hearing this sentence in the conversation. I needed to replace my laptop battery. It died 1/4 of the way to LA last week, so I couldn't finish the presentation.
Can you figure out whether the person flew coach or business? Because we can.
You are going away from the microphone.
Yeah, we can, and that's what we will show, that is our system can do it automatically.
You don't have electric plugs and cords?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sir.
pretty much it.
Pretty much, yeah.
So what we need here, or how our system works, is we are breaking the sentence into 3 clauses. I need to replace my battery. It died 1/4 of the way to LA last week, and I couldn't finish the presentation. here is the TMR for the first sentence. So what it is saying is that you need to buy a new battery, laptop battery right here. You have to do it again. You really don't want to, but you have no choice. You have to replace it.
Low on free will. You don't have much freedom not to do it.
And that's our representation, rough representation of I need to replace my laptop battery.
That's what was deontic modality, Chris. Cat renamed them all.
It died 1/4 of the way to LA last week. Again, we are using the text meaning representation of it. It is the battery that came to an end of its life. It happened during a travel while you were on the airplane. You started in Los Angeles. You ended in Los Angeles. You started somewhere, we don't know where. It was last week, -1 here indicates last, and it died during the trip. And again, here we have I couldn't finish the presentation. 6 says 0, phase end, fairly typical, nothing major about it. Then we are taking them and combining them, so TMR1 on the first sentence is the effect of whatever happened in the second, not sentence, but clause, and the second clause is causing the third clause. And here is the additional information that we need to make something out of it.
And which is captured in our ontology or other
Or should
resources.
be if it isn't.
Or yeah, if it isn't, but most of it is. So this slide basically reconstructs the path from the sentence to the fact that in all likelihood the person was flying non-business, because in business there is an electric outlet.
So how are we getting to non-business? We know that computer can be powered either through the electric plug or the battery. We have absolutely no information about the electric plug. We'll have to figure out whether it was there or not. We are going through the airplane. We know that the battery died and nothing else was available. Where the electric plugs are available, only in business. And the computer stayed down. The person couldn't work. Therefore, the person is not flying business. It's a very rough estimation because in some planes, coach also has the electric plugs and some business doesn't. So it's to give you some idea. Of course, you would have to double check that hypothesis.
But it's enough for a flag, if that is what you are trying to figure out.
Look at the other sentence. I need to replace my battery. It died 1/4 of the way to LA last week. Exactly the same information. Good that I didn't check in the power cord. So that power cord was plugged in somewhere on the airplane. What does it tell us?
Probably business class. Yeah. So we deliberately took non-simple sentences, situations when we have to dive deep into the ontology to figure out how one property leads to another. We actually gave you a glimpse of another much more complicated and not fully implemented component of the system, which is sometimes referred to as the inference engine. It's reasoning. That is, the system allows you to reason like a human or a little better. That is, not allowing for human error or fatigue or lapse of attention. So that's what we have done so far, and we wanted to tell you about it. One of the reviewers of the paper was really scared. He's one of the gurus of information security, and he said, "What are you doing, guys? It's brilliant. It works. I'm already living in a police state, and this way we will all be supervised 24 hours a day." Well, I told him, Steve, I grew up in a police state. And believe you me, you are not living in a police state. And so you are living in a state where a warrant can be obtained for a personal search of you and where you live. We are not going anywhere beyond that.
questions. Thank you for your
Thank you.
attention.
The question that I have is with regard to the case where you said there could be a traitor and you try to flag him using these kind of things. But isn't there a requirement that the audience must be default aware whenever you try to flag any of these situations? Because let's say the person whom he's talking to is someone from a family member or something. In that case, usually they have a tendency to communicate all kinds of things. Anything is not out of the norm.
We are not showing you another part of it, and that was in the first paper. And that's when you take the audience into account. So sometimes you have to state the obvious to you just to adapt to the audience knowledge. That's not taken into account here. We are only interested in the very simplest case. Okay?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Imagine you are a door-to-door salesman. I'm not even sure they exist anymore. And you come back home and your wife asks you, how did you do? And you say, as usual. And she knows how usual. You may be an incredible person, it's 100%. Or it may be you never sell anything.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the TMRs that you have suggested.
Mhm.
So, was it designed for each and every kind of sentences by looking through the formation of sentences, or what went behind the creation?
The TMRs are done automatically. The computer is creating them. So it is looking at the sentence, it goes through the lexicon, it looks at the words, it goes through the ontology, maps them to the ontology, the information that's there, and then it's just simple logic. What works according to the ontology and what doesn't. The interpretations that don't work according to the ontology are discarded. Those that are okay according to our knowledge of the world are okay. That's not done just for this example. That's a software that's in a production level software. So any text would go through the analyzer exactly the same way.
At this point of implementation, it does well with most sentences without an enormously complicated syntax. And the main formula for you, just to get a quick grasp of it, it's all event-oriented. We identify the word which is an event, like go in the simple example. And we look up in the ontology what properties it has, what should it be filled with, and then try to match the rest of the material in the sentence into that event. It works extremely well, surprisingly frequently, and then we work on the complications.
Yeah, the main question I have is the subjective variations that come with the word and the events. It's good that I did not check in the top card. So, how is good associated with the event of?
It's according to the speaker. There is such a thing that will tell you the speaker thinks that it is good. So it's the speaker's evaluation of the event.
We are also, something we failed to mention, is that we are working to apply the system to a much wider range of applications. Where it will work very well is if the statements produced by the suspect or observations about his or her behavior can be compared against the written expectations. You know, sometimes websites have written policies. All institutions where security clearance, for instance, is required, have a kind of a, not exactly a code of behavior, but think of the polygraph. That is, what questions are you asked there? The questions that are significant. There's a certain set of expectations, the do's and the don'ts. And the system can compare the material, the observations, the output of any individual against these do's and don'ts. At this point, we are very shy. At this point, we are just flagging what my friend whom I mentioned, whose name is Steve, was afraid of, that we will delegate the executive power to this system. That is, it will decide that the person is a traitor and execute that person.
It seems a kind of contradiction because in the last example you mentioned that if he said, oh good that I had my power supply, I could plug it in, but in the previous sentence you didn't even mention maybe the guy who ran out of the battery, he didn't have his power supply with him.
Well, it's two different examples. What
No,
we
I know, but in the previous example you didn't mention that maybe he forgot his power supply, so even
But he did. But sir, he didn't finish the presentation.
Yeah, he didn't finish
It-
it because he
yes.
didn't have the power supply.
Yes.
You concluded that therefore he was in coach, but he was not in business
Yes,
class.
but you are implying that it's typical for him to forget his power supply or check that in. If it's typical for him to check that in, again, we will know that because we know his more or less typical behavior, right? So we will know that what is happening.
No, you are making a lot of presumption. Maybe he was in a hurry, he wouldn't have charged his battery.
Then he would have
or-
told us that.
Yeah.
Then he would have told us that.
You realize that's why I just said what I said. We're only flagging. There are all kinds of extenuating circumstances. But if these circumstances are unusual in a casual conversation, people would say that. Can you imagine what an idiot I have become? I checked in my power cord and I couldn't finish the presentation because of that. We know nothing about the cabin class. And the system realizes that. But also, please understand that we are only flagging. That is, maybe there is something here, and there may be some unusual circumstances which completely exonerate the person. But we assume that if those are unusual, the person would blurt them out.
To the point that you can ask the person, well, what happened to your power supply? You know, you don't have some information that you expect, you can ask. But again, we are assuming that anything out of the ordinary would be told. So if it's unusual for him to check it in and he did it, he would have told us.
You realize that the only advantages of the system that we are selling you are it's free of error. It will do it all the time. It will integrate 2 months later, 6 months later. Is it smarter than a human being? No. We are trying to emulate the behavior of an incredibly smart team of investigators who are watching this person and discussing every detail. And we're doing it much cheaply.
Yeah, but basically the way that you are speaking is as if he's not flagging. You already know the person, everything about the person, and then you are analyzing what he said or he didn't say. It was not just flagging what he was doing because...
No, by flagging I mean that when there is a reason to suspect that something is amiss, then we flag to the human investigators that this situation should be explored
The way
more.
you are explaining, because you said the usual is this, that means you know the usual about the person. That means he's already under investigation. That means he has already been flagged.
He is already a person of interest, yeah. So we assume that there is access to the information in the table.
But that's the second level. The first level, your usual, is the typical behavior of any human being in this situation. So you don't need to know necessarily anything about this particular person. You have some knowledge that's in your ontology about a typical behavior of a human. If that doesn't work, then you start looking at this particular individual and go for his typical behavior. So there are levels to that.
Yeah, basically, because you are saying that he has been, or he or she has already been flagged. So this is in the continuing investigation that you are looking at some other stuff. Not just original.
It is possible. It is possible that this is a person of interest already, and then we are at a more advanced stage. In principle, like Julia just said, you can activate the system for absolutely anybody, and as you accumulate these unusual, strange, unintended inferences, things that are given away, the defaults, that is the expectations which are overwritten, then you can advance the investigation to a different stage and get more information, get into more databases, fill out the table like that. That table, you are absolutely right, reflects an advanced stage already.
And we are out of time.
Any more questions? Yeah, sure. Could you
Speak up.
talk up? There is a mic there, I think, because otherwise it will be lost for eternity.
It's just green lights.
The green light should be on.
Yeah, just a offhand comment that usually for detecting events, like you're saying, unusual events, there is, and especially just by using text stream of data, which is exactly what you have probably from blogs and nothing more. There is a parallel research going on called topic detection and tracking, where you detect topics from a text stream and you track those events over time. Have you ever thought about comparing?
Yeah, that is done, if I understand you correctly, it is done on the basis of keywords.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is so unreliable. What we are offering you is a much better deal.
But yes, it is possible to go back to the sentences that whatever the method, again, flagged, and reanalyze them and get that information the way that would be useful to us.
You understand
Yes,
that
it's possible to do.
the difference is that ours is the system, unfortunately so far the only system, that understands text, not just marks the occurrence of this or that significant word. When you when you work with keywords, the best you can do is a Google search. And should I convince you that this is not the best thing in the world? Thank you.